Cavs fans, welcome on in. It's the day we've been waiting over a month for, really, since it was announced that JB Bickerstaff had been removed from the head coaching position, and the Cavaliers were starting a search. Spence and I were there at Kobe Altman's end of season press conference, where he kind of discussed the decision and what was going to go into making a decision on a new head coach. And we finally have arrived at the day where they've found that new candidate, that new person to lead the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's Spencer German. It's Spencer Davies with you. Excited to get to this point and be able to react with you. Spence, let's just, break this down a little bit because, it's been an interesting, again, month plus since JB Bickerstaff was removed. And there was different reports of who was maybe the leader in the clubhouse at different phases of this process. How did the Cavaliers, you think, end up with Kenny Atkinson as the person they choose to take on this role of head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers?
Well, first off, with Kenny Atkinson, I think it's pretty clear and obvious that the end of his tenure with the Nets didn't go as planned, and maybe the superstars took some control there at the end of the tenure, and that's what led to the mutual parting of ways. With Kenny, I think the big factor here is the player development. And it sounds kind of interesting because the Cavs are in a place where they're almost in between, where they want to win a championship, but they've still got a lot of young talent and a core that needs developing. Yeah. So for me, this is thinking of Evan Mobley in mind. This is thinking of Darius Garland in mind at the top of their minds, I think. Just that Evan, they want him to be the guy. They want, if they get to a championship, he's going to have to be the guy. And I think that Donovan Mitchell knows that. I think that even Jared Allen has seen it in Evan too. And he's talked very, very highly of him during the season before. And that also brings into a number of questions what the direction of the core four is going to be, because this is a player development hire, but it's also somebody that I think that they know that Kenny can get them to that next tier. And he didn't get a chance to show that in Brooklyn. So I think that it's both like a chance for each side to show that they can. And, I think that the Cavs should be very happy with this hire. I know there was some reports about Dan Gilbert potentially getting involved. And even if he did, this is one of those situations where this is not an outside the box hire. This is somebody who is proven, has a track record of taking a team from the dumps and taking them to a very respectable position, and didn't get a chance to finish what he started.
Yeah, it's a good point, and especially bringing up Dan Gilbert's involvement in this, because we know in the past when Dan has been involved, it's kind of been this almost last-second Hail Mary type announcements where it's like, oh, hey, here comes David Blatt, or here comes John Beilein, and we know how those things went. I'm sure from a fan perspective, you hear Dan Gilbert was involved, and you're jaded. I get that. Like, I get why fans might be jaded, like a little bit like, Dan Gilbert maybe swooped in and made this hire at the last second. But I think to your point, Spence, it is worth noting, like, Atkinson, the other big name that it kind of came down to, it sounds like, was James Borrego. And as soon as JB Bickerstaff was relieved of his duties, those were the two names that you saw Woj reporting, Shams reporting, all the big insiders had said, like, those are two people to keep an eye on that could get interest from the Cavaliers. So I think that's important to know going into this decision, because it points to, yeah, maybe Dan Gilbert at the last second really wanted Atkinson more than he wanted Borrego. But the fact that both these guys seem to be at the top of their list were names that were linked to them from the start. I don't necessarily think it has to be this take a step back and be like, was this the right choice type thing. I think both these guys are very qualified, and clearly they ended up settling on Atkinson. And I think, to your point, like, the player development part of this is important. I also think no matter which one you were going to choose, they're clearly prioritizing offense and trying to get more out of the offense, both Borrego and Atkinson, the one they settle on. Ball movement is very important in their offenses. And, yeah, defense doesn't necessarily take a back seat, but that's been the thing we've been wanting to see more of, especially when you talk about players like Darius Garland, like Evan Mobley, and trying to get the most out of them. So I think that is important for people to keep in mind. How do you think, along the lines of talking about just the offensive, prioritizing offense and what he kind of brings to the table, what does Atkinson sort of bring that you think will benefit this young Cavaliers team as they do pursue championships, but also try to develop some of these young players that they have on the roster?
I think that they're going to play a lot faster, and we got a little glimpse of that last year when Jimmy Bickerstaff was, adamant on making sure that they did play with pace, and I thought they did do a good job of that last year. I think Kenny's just going to take that and up it a little bit more. Very fast, playing teams that he's coached, and a lot, for me, I'm thinking of Evan Mobley, and I've kept harping on this throughout the season, but Evan Mobley being more of a playmaker, maybe more, attentive to taking shots, being more involved in the offense. Darius Garland, I could see him getting involved off ball now a lot, shooting more, like upping his attempts to, 9 or 10 threes a game. I think that's something that we could really see happening with Kenny Atkinson. I'm interested to see, if Karis LeVert's still around, if Jared Allen's still around, if he takes similar concepts that he had in Brooklyn and implants them into what's here in Cleveland. I just think that there's going to be a lot faster. They're going to be, a little bit more, probably prone to mistakes, honestly, when it get to the start, because they're going to be passing the ball so much. And defensively, I know there could be a little bit of concern because JB was one of the best defensive coaches in the NBA, no question. Schematically proven to work. I think that they have the concepts in their minds and they know the timing on their ends, and they got such good individual defenders that it's not going to take as much of a step back as maybe some people might guess, just because there's some influence on the offensive side of the ball and more of a focus and a point of emphasis on that side. I don't think they're going to take too much of a step back on the defensive end, but they will be playing faster and they will be popping that ball around.
I think that's a good thing to bring up too, because JB Bickerstaff might be gone, but what isn't gone is the knowledge that this team has of how well they can play defensively and how good they could be. And obviously things are going to be different. You have a different coach, different philosophies, all that. They might not play defense the exact same way, but they still kind of know like what works and how to certain do things and nuances of what's worked for them to have success on that end of the floor. And so that sticks, even if things are going to be a little bit different. And I don't think they have to completely lose that from their identity just because Kenny Atkinson comes in with this more offensive-minded background. So I think that's really good. I also think it's worth noting, Spence, and I'm guessing this probably played a pretty big part in choosing Kenny Atkinson, is the fact that he's coming from Golden State and was able to work under Steve Kerr. And, some of the things that plagued him when he was in Brooklyn, once things kind of went south with the superstars that came in, he's now been part of a team that has that superstar level talent and how to kind of manage those guys and work with those guys, even though it didn't work for him when he was by himself in Brooklyn. Now he has more sort of knowledge on how to see some different things and do some different things. And I think that can be beneficial, especially when you look what Mike Brown's done for his career. Like, he had been a coach in Cleveland twice, flamed out twice, and now he's been able to kind of revive his career and is a coach that's been somewhat sought after now with the Kings because of his time that he spent under Steve Kerr in Golden State, sort of learning, later in his career, some different things that maybe work for him. So I think that maybe played a role in this conversation and this decision as well, that the front office and Dan Gilbert had in eventually selecting Atkinson as the guy.
And if I could add too, he spent the first season after Brooklyn with the Clippers under Ty Lue. So point. That also, is maybe Ty gave him some, a good word. And we know that he spent time with Greg Popovich, and I just retweeted that on my Twitter timeline too, just about when, at the end of that tenure again in Brooklyn, the way that it went, Pop he spoke very highly of Kenny Atkinson in that clip. So if you guys wanted to check that out, I put a couple up on there. And the other one was me asking about Jared Allen 6 years ago. May I add, 6 years ago, I asked Kenny Atkinson about Jared Allen in the visiting press conference room. And if Jarrett's, still around here and Kenny, him reunite, then it'll be, like you said, a full circle moment. But I think the other part that we really didn't talk about with Kenny Atkinson, and if you look at some of these Brooklyn Nets rosters, no offense to any of those guys that played on those teams, Kenny Atkinson got the best out of what he had to work with.
Yeah.
And there were some lineups on there that were very, very, like, you look at them and you say, that's an NBA team. Are you sure? Like, because there were some injuries that they would deal with. They had, I'm telling you, go on the Basketball Reference site and look up those Nets rosters from, 15 to 17 before, Spencer Dinwiddie burned scorch earth, and they had D'Angelo Russell looking really good. And obviously they had Jared Allen, Karis LeVert, and all them. But there were some really, really shoddy looking lineups out there. And he did the best to bring the best out of them, I guess I was going to say. So that's one thing, again, I think that Cavs fans will enjoy about Kenny Atkinson, as well as it's almost in the sense of how Tito did that with the Tribe when he came in. Like, it's almost like Kenny's got that type of ability as well as a head coach. And that the one place that I think that might be a disconnect is that he's a little bit older. And I think we've talked about that in the past, said that he was 57 and James Borrego is 44, maybe not quite as close to this generation. But like you said, if he spent time with people in Golden State the last few years, has worked with Ty Lue and has the endorsement of Greg Popovich, I think that that's a really good sign.
Yeah, and I would venture to say, as you sort of line this up with the other big decision that's looming for the Cavs in terms of a max extension for Donovan Mitchell, I'm guessing he had some input in this. I don't necessarily think that means like they're calling him saying, "Hey, who do you want to hire?" But like I'm assuming they wouldn't have whittled the list down to the guys that they whittled it down to and made this decision fully without some sort of understanding with Donovan Mitchell of like, yeah, I feel really good about this guy. I can work with that guy. I think he's a great basketball mind. So I think that that's probably in play here as well. And from all indications, there should be or could be a decision on Donovan Mitchell's max contract extension coming here very, very soon, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, at some point this week, at the very least, it seems. So that'll obviously make for a very good news week for the Cleveland Cavaliers as they kind of get some of these things finalized leading into the draft and leading into free agency next week. I think the other thing that you kind of alluded to earlier, Spence, and maybe this is a good point for us to get to and maybe close with, is what this hire means for the core four, because you bring up the developmental piece that comes to mind with Atkinson and his ability to, take young guys and get the most out of them and turn them into good players. That maybe is something where people look and they're like, oh, so what does that mean for this roster right now? What are they going to do? When you think about trying to turn Evan Mobley into the guy that we saw at the end of the playoffs, where Jared Allen wasn't out there and, he kind of had to carry a bigger workload and you saw him thrive in that role. What do you think that a hire like this means for keeping that group together? Because to this point, it's been a lot of Kobe Altman saying, hey, we're not going to touch anything. We feel good about our group. Why would we blow it up? Now, you and I both agree that there's probably a lot of posturing going on in right now at this phase of the offseason where you're not going to try to give anything away. You're not going to try to lower some player's value by saying, yeah, we want him gone. So you got to kind of play the game. But what do you think this team or that core four could look like when the dust kind of settles on free agency and the draft here in the coming weeks?
So the fact that this is more of a player developmental centric look for them, I'm waffling. Okay. Like everyone asks me, what are they going to do? What are they going to do? Friends,
well, and I'll
family,
say this too, Spence, I'll add this too, because, the player development part of it is obviously a big thing, but also like his relationship with Jared Allen, having worked with him in Brooklyn. And from all indications, he didn't necessarily want to move on from Jared Allen, but the stars on that team really pushed for DeAndre Jordan to start at center. And so that kind of played into the whole thing. Yep. So like, there's kind of two different things here. Cause if you are trying to get the most out of Evan Mobley, it might mean you have to move on from Jared Allen, but does Kenny Atkinson really want to move on from Jared Allen? So yeah, there's a lot of different angles in play here.
And let's not forget too, last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, I'm losing track of time. JB Bickerstaff, the radio thing, and Donovan Mitchell posting on his Instagram. Yeah. I hate that that's what news is in today's world, but it is. And Donovan posting something like that where he's hugging Jared Allen in a picture shows me that he probably wants Jared to stick around. And I'm sure that he still loves Evan Mobley. And we know that he has a great relationship with Darius Garland. I don't know which way they're going to go. I think that with a new coach, I could see them just running it back and seeing if new concepts and a way to make that work, see what happens. If it's not showing the signs that you're thinking or wanting, then you always have the trade deadline, or you can always go a different direction. What's the rush? Essentially, I've flip-flopped on this so many times. I'm not going to act like I have called for anything or know anything like in that sense, because I think that they're still trying to evaluate it. And it's hard when you have the injuries and then also when you have the different combinations they've had to go through, just because of some, non-continuity, just because of the injuries, like I was saying, and the setbacks that they've had. I know I just kind of repeated myself there, but it's just hard. It's hard to put, a finger on it, because that doesn't give you the best, kind of layout and seeing what works and what doesn't if they've barely played together. And that includes the combination with Max Strus that we don't even talking about, and Karis LeVert too. Karis LeVert plays quite a bit with that core four. So they're probably in evaluation mode, to be honest. And it might be some experimentation early in the season, I think, is the word to look at there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch play out. I'm sure at some point, Spence, you and I will be at an introductory press conference for Kenny Atkinson, and we'll be reading into every word that he says about the core four. And
let's not forget about the NBA draft that comes on Wednesday, and the second round comes on Thursday. I'm sure we'll be at a press conference at some point. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see when they do all that.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll be reading into every word that comes out of Kobe Altman's mouth, out of Kenny Atkinson's mouth, and we'll try to kind of dissect what's going to happen here. But yeah, a lot of different things that sort of come to mind with this hire. But the biggest news, of course, right now, Cavaliers do have a new head coach. It's official. Kenny Atkinson coming in to be the next head coach and replacing JB Bickerstaff. What do you guys think about the hire? You can hit us up on X at Spencito_ for me, at Spin Davies for Spence. And you can obviously follow along as we continue to monitor this news and other big news that could come down this week at si.com/NBA/Cavaliers. And we'll be sure to have you covered over there with everything as it breaks in real time. We already got some stuff up about Kenny Atkinson. I'm working on a piece about Dan Gilbert's influence on the decision. So we'll get to all that stuff for you and hopefully more. We appreciate you guys tuning in, and hopefully we'll be back talking to you guys soon after a introductory press conference or a press conference coming up with the draft this week. Take care, guys, and we'll talk to you soon.